I never thought I'd be the guy with an HOA nightmare story, but here we are. My name is Marcus, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was the suburban dream. Good job as an architectural engineer, a beautiful home I'd saved years to buy, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. The Oak Ridge Heights community had seemed perfect when I purchased my corner lot 3 years ago. Pristine lawns, quiet streets, and a sense of order that appealed to my methodical nature. The homeowners association fees were steep, but the amenities and property values made it worthwhile, or so I thought. It all started on a Saturday morning in April. I'd been traveling for work all week, flying back late Friday night after completing a major project in Boston. All I wanted was to sleep in and then spend the weekend relaxing in my backyard with a good book and maybe firing up the grill. I was awakened at precisely 7:30 a.m. by the sound of metal clanging against metal. Not just any clanging, the distinctive sound of fence posts being hammered into the ground, very close to my bedroom window. I stumbled out of bed, threw on a robe, and peered through the blinds. What I saw made me think I was still dreaming. There, along what I knew to be the edge of my property, was a crew of 4 workers installing metal fence posts. And supervising them, clipboard in hand and oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the early hour, was Diane Whitfield, the newly elected president of our HOA board. I'd only met her once at a community barbecue where she'd spent 15 minutes explaining to me why my choice of outdoor furniture lacked cohesion with the neighborhood aesthetic. I'd nodded politely while silently vowing to avoid her at future events. Now here she was, standing on what was definitely my lawn, directing workers to install a fence I hadn't requested or approved. I quickly threw on some clothes and headed outside, trying to keep my composure. "Good morning, Diane," I said, keeping my voice level despite my confusion. "Mind telling me what's going on here?" Diane turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was in her mid-50s with an impeccable blonde bob and wearing what looked like tennis whites despite no tennis courts being anywhere nearby. "Oh, good morning, Marcus. I hope we didn't wake you. The board voted last week to install property demarcation fencing along all community spaces. We're just getting an early start before it gets too hot." I blinked, trying to process this. Community spaces? This is my property. I own up to that oak tree over there. I pointed to the mature tree about 15 feet from where we were standing. Diane's smile tightened as she flipped through pages on her clipboard. "Actually, according to the updated survey, this 8-foot perimeter belongs to the HOA as common area easement. It's all in the documentation." She thrust a paper toward me. "Some kind of property diagram with highlighted areas along my property line." "I've never seen this survey," I said, taking the paper from her. "And when I purchased this house, my property line was clearly established. I have the original survey in my files." The diagram she'd handed me looked official enough, with a stamp and signature, but the date on it was just 2 months ago, well after I'd bought my home. "Well, things change, Marcus," Diane said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The board commissioned a new survey of all corner lots after some discrepancies were discovered. We sent notices to all affected homeowners." She glanced at the workers who had paused their activities. "Keep going, gentlemen. We need to finish this section by noon." Then, turning back to me, "If you have concerns, you're welcome to bring them up at the next board meeting. It's the 2nd Tuesday of the month." I felt my blood pressure rising but kept my voice steady. "I never received any notice about a new survey or a change to my property line, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop this work until we can sort this out." Diane's friendly facade dropped momentarily. "The work has been approved by the board and we're proceeding according to schedule. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, there's a process for that." She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "My contact information. Email is preferred for record-keeping purposes." With that, she turned her attention back to her clipboard, effectively dismissing me. I stood there for a moment, torn between demanding they stop and not wanting to create a scene. The workers were avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable but not willing to get involved. Finally, I decided to retreat and gather my evidence. "This isn't over, Diane," I said, quietly. "I'll be bringing this up with the board and my attorney if necessary." She didn't even look up from her clipboard. "Have a nice day, Marcus." I went back inside, my peaceful weekend now thoroughly ruined. I immediately pulled out my home purchase documents, including the original property survey. Sure enough, my property line extended exactly where I thought it did, to the large oak tree that had been a selling point when I bought the house. I took photos of my documents, then went back outside to take pictures of the ongoing fence installation. Diane was now sitting in a folding chair under a small canopy, supervising while sipping from a travel mug. Next, I called a neighbor I'd become friendly with, Robert Chen, who lived across the street and had been in the neighborhood for over a decade. When I explained what was happening, he sounded concerned. "That doesn't sound right, Marcus. I've never heard of the HOA reclaiming property like that. Diane's only been on the board for 3 months, but she's already made some interesting decisions." "Do you know any of the other board members?" I asked, "someone I could talk to about this?" "Michael Grantham is the treasurer," Robert said. "He's reasonable, been on the board for years. I have his number if you want it." I took down Michael's information and called him immediately. To my relief, he answered and was willing to listen to my concerns. "I wasn't at the last meeting due to a family emergency," he told me after I explained the situation. "I don't recall any vote about a new survey or installing fences on corner lots. Let me look into this and get back to you." While waiting to hear back from Michael, I continued documenting everything. The fence installation continued throughout the morning, with the metal posts now completely encircling the 8-foot perimeter of my corner lot. It was starting to look like my house was being caged in. Neighbors were slowing down as they drove past, some stopping to stare outright. I could only imagine what they were thinking. Around 1 p.m., Michael called me back. "Marcus, I've checked the minutes from recent meetings and there was no official vote on this fence installation or property line adjustment. Diane brought up beautification initiatives at the last meeting, but nothing specific was approved. I've called an emergency board meeting for 5 p.m. today at the community center. Can you attend?" "Absolutely," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "I'll bring all my documentation." "Good," Michael said. "I've also called the other 3 board members. Something odd is going on here, and we need to get to the bottom of it." I spent the next few hours organizing my documents and preparing what I would say at the meeting. By 4:45 p.m. I was walking into the community center with a folder full of evidence. The small conference room was already occupied by Michael and 2 other board members, Jennifer Lopez, no relation to the celebrity as she always quickly pointed out, and David Masterson. Diane arrived precisely at 5, looking surprised to see everyone already there. "What's this about?" she asked as she took her seat at the head of the table. "I wasn't informed of any emergency meeting." "I called it," Michael said firmly. "We need to discuss the fence installation that began this morning around Marcus's property." Diane's smile was strained. "Oh, it's part of the beautification initiative we discussed last month. Corner lot demarcation to enhance community aesthetics and clarity." "We discussed general beautification," Jennifer said, frowning. "We never voted on installing fences or altering property lines. That would require a full community vote, not just board approval." Diane waved a dismissive hand. "It was implicit in the discussion, and it's not altering property lines, it's clarifying existing ones. The survey clearly shows—" "Well, survey," David interrupted. "The board never commissioned a new survey. That would be in the financial records, which I review monthly." I watched as Diane's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "It was an executive decision. As president, I have certain discretionary authorities. Not for expenditures over $1,000 without board approval," Michael said firmly, "and not for actions that affect homeowners' property rights." "Diane, what's really going on here?" All eyes turned to Diane, who suddenly seemed very interested in organizing the papers in front of her. After a moment, she looked up with a tight smile. "I was merely being proactive about community boundaries. The corner lots have always been problematic, and clearly defining HOA spaces versus private property will prevent future disputes." "But why my property specifically?" I asked, speaking up for the first time. "And why wasn't I notified about this supposed survey or the fence installation?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Jennifer spoke. "Diane, is this related to the landscaping proposal you brought up last month? The one for additional common areas?" Diane's cheeks flushed slightly. "That's a separate matter entirely." "Is it?" Michael asked. "Because I recall you mentioning wanting to expand community garden spaces, but we tabled it due to lack of suitable common areas." The pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind. "You're trying to create new common areas by taking portions of private property," I said, looking directly at Diane, "starting with my corner lot." David turned to me. "Marcus, do you have your original property survey with you?" I nodded and pulled out the document, spreading it on the table. "This is from 3 years ago, when I purchased the home. As you can see, my property line extends to that oak tree, not 8 feet inside where the fence is being installed." The board members examined my documentation, then looked at the survey Diane had produced. After a moment, Michael spoke. "This new survey isn't official, it has a stamp, but it's not from any registered surveyor in our county. Diane, did you fabricate this document?" Diane stood up abruptly. "This meeting is inappropriate and possibly illegal. I'm leaving now, and I suggest we reconvene when everyone is being more reasonable." She gathered her papers and headed for the door. "If you leave," Michael called after her, "we'll vote without you. And our first order of business will be to halt the fence installation and investigate potential misappropriation of HOA funds." Diane froze with her hand on the doorknob, then slowly turned around. Her face had lost its friendly veneer entirely now. "You're making a big mistake. This neighborhood needs leadership with vision, not small-minded bureaucrats who can't see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture being what, exactly?" Jennifer asked. "Taking people's property without permission?" "Creating community spaces," Diane snapped. "Do you know how much property values increase with properly designed community gardens and gathering spaces? My last neighborhood saw a 15% increase after implementing my designs." "Your designs?" I echoed, suddenly understanding. "You're a landscaper." It wasn't a question. I remembered now that she'd mentioned her design business at that community barbecue. "I'm a landscape architect with 20 years of experience," Diane corrected stiffly. "And yes, I was planning to submit a proposal for the new community spaces once they were properly established. It would have been a win-win for everyone. Except for the homeowners losing parts of their property," David said dryly. "And there's the matter of you potentially giving yourself a contract, which would be a clear conflict of interest." The meeting continued for another hour as the board methodically dismantled Diane's scheme. It turned out she had hired the survey company herself, not an actual surveyor but a friend with a graphic design business who had created official-looking documents. The fence installation had been contracted through her husband's cousin's company with an inflated price that included a consultant fee that would have gone back to Diane. She had been planning to claim 8-foot perimeters from all corner lots in the development, a total of 12 properties, creating enough space for a series of pocket gardens that her company would design and maintain for a substantial ongoing fee. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted unanimously, minus Diane, to immediately halt the fence installation, remove what had already been installed at HOA expense, launch a full audit of all decisions made since Diane had become president, and schedule a special community meeting to elect a new president. Diane sat stone-faced through the votes, occasionally checking her phone as if receiving urgent messages. As the meeting wrapped up, Michael turned to me. "Marcus, on behalf of the board and the community, I want to apologize for this situation. We'll have that fence removed first thing tomorrow morning." "Thank you," I said, genuinely relieved. "I appreciate how quickly you've addressed this." Diane stood up, gathering her things. "This isn't over. You'll be hearing from my attorney." "I look forward to it," Michael replied calmly. "I'm sure they'll be interested in the documentation we've gathered today about fraudulent surveys and misappropriation of funds." As we all left the community center, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare seemed to be over almost as quickly as it had begun, but I underestimated just how stubborn Diane Whitfield could be. The next morning, I awoke to find not the fence removal crew I was expecting, but Diane herself standing in my front yard with a man in a suit who I assumed was her attorney. They were taking photos and measurements, occasionally pointing toward my house and gesturing animatedly. I watched them for a few minutes, then called Michael to inform him of this development. "She just doesn't quit," Michael said, sounding exasperated. "I'll be right over with our HOA attorney. Don't engage with them until we arrive." I followed his advice, though it was difficult to ignore the spectacle unfolding on my lawn. Neighbors were slowing as they drove past, some stopping outright to watch. Within 20 minutes, Michael arrived with an older gentleman carrying a briefcase. They approached Diane and her companion, and though I couldn't hear the conversation from inside my house, the body language told me it wasn't friendly. After about 10 minutes of what appeared to be heated discussion, Diane and her attorney retreated to her car, though not before Diane pointed dramatically at my house one last time. Michael and the HOA attorney then came to my door. "That was interesting," Michael said when I invited them in. "Diane's claiming that regardless of the property line issue, your oak tree violates HOA height restrictions and needs to be removed. She's grasping at straws now." The HOA attorney, Mr. Goldstein, shook his head. "The tree predates the community by at least 50 years and was specifically exempted in the original HOA covenant. I have no idea what she's hoping to accomplish, but legally she doesn't have a leg to stand on." "What happens now?" I asked. "The fence removal crew will be here within the hour," Michael assured me, "and we're holding the special election for a new HOA president next Saturday. In the meantime, Diane has been temporarily removed from the board pending the investigation." True to his word, the fence removal crew arrived promptly and began taking down the metal posts. As they worked, I noticed Diane driving slowly past my house several times, taking photos from her car. It was unsettling, but I tried to focus on the positive. My property was being restored, and the HOA was addressing the problem. Over the next week, things seemed to calm down. The fence was completely removed, the holes filled, and my lawn repaired. The special election was scheduled, and several reasonable candidates had stepped forward. I began to think the whole incident was behind me. Then, exactly 1 week after the emergency board meeting, I received a certified letter. It wasn't from the HOA but from a law firm representing Diane Whitfield personally. The letter claimed that during her inspection of the property line, she had suffered a fall due to an unmarked hazard on my lawn, resulting in a sprained ankle and emotional distress. She was demanding $25,000 in damages. I immediately called Michael, who was as surprised as I was. "This is ridiculous," he said after I read him the letter. "Did she fall when she was there with her attorney? Because neither of them mentioned anything about a fall when we spoke." "Not that I saw," I said, "and I was watching them the whole time." "Document everything," Michael advised, "and call your homeowner's insurance. They'll probably want to handle this. In the meantime, we're still moving forward with the audit and election." My insurance company assigned an adjuster who came out the next day to inspect my property. "I don't see any hazards here," she said after walking the perimeter of my lawn. "The grounds are well maintained, no unexpected holes or obstructions. I'd be interested to know exactly where this alleged fall took place." I showed her the security camera I'd installed after the fence incident began, a simple video doorbell that captured most of my front yard. "I haven't reviewed the footage from that day, but it might show something." The adjuster nodded. "That could be very helpful. If you could provide any footage from the day she claims she fell, it would strengthen our position." That evening, I went through the security footage from the day Diane and her attorney had been on my property. To my surprise, the video clearly showed Diane walking normally around my yard for about 15 minutes, with no sign of a fall or injury. When Michael and the HOA attorney arrived, she continued to move normally, even storming off to her car with purposeful strides after their conversation ended. I downloaded the footage and sent it to both my insurance adjuster and Michael. The next day, my insurance company called to inform me they were denying Diane's claim based on the video evidence and would be sending her attorney a formal response, including the footage. 2 days later, Michael called with an update. "Diane has withdrawn her personal injury claim," he said, sounding pleased, "and the audit has revealed some other interesting financial discrepancies during her brief tenure as president. Nothing major, but enough to raise serious questions about her judgment." "That's good news," I said, feeling relieved. "Has she said anything about the upcoming election?" "That's the best part," Michael replied. She's moving. Put her house on the market yesterday. Apparently her husband got a sudden job opportunity in Arizona. I couldn't help but laugh. That's quite a coincidence. Isn't it just? Michael sounded equally amused. By the way, the election is still on for Saturday. You should consider running for the board. We could use someone with your attention to detail. I thanked him for the suggestion but declined. My brief foray into HOA politics had been quite enough for me. The election went forward as planned, with Robert Chen, my across-the-street neighbor, being elected as the new president. Under his leadership, the board implemented new transparency measures, including detailed notifications for all homeowners about any decisions affecting their properties, and a requirement for multiple bids on all contract work. As for Diane Whitfield, her house sold quickly. The real estate market in our area was hot and she was gone within a month. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her landscape architecture business had lost several contracts after word spread about her actions in our community. Apparently, attempting to fraudulently appropriate private property didn't inspire confidence in potential clients. The most satisfying epilogue came about 3 months later. The new HOA board had been reviewing old proposals and came across Diane's original landscaping plan for the community spaces she had tried to create. Out of curiosity, Robert shared it with me. The designs were actually quite beautiful. Small garden areas with benches, flowering plants, and walkways that would have connected the various corner lots. "It's a shame she went about it the wrong way," Robert commented. "This could have been a nice addition to the neighborhood if she'd simply proposed it honestly and asked for voluntary participation." That got me thinking. The corner of my property with the oak tree was beautiful but underutilized. After some consideration, I submitted my own proposal to the HOA. I would voluntarily dedicate a small portion of my corner lot, about 4 feet along the perimeter, as a community garden space, with the understanding that I retained ownership but was granting an easement for community use. To my surprise, several other corner lot owners were intrigued by the idea and made similar offers. Within 6 months, we had created a series of connected garden spaces throughout the neighborhood, smaller than Diane's original vision, but created through cooperation rather than deception. I even incorporated some elements from her original designs, though I hired a different landscape architect to implement them. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Diane's scheme had ultimately led to the very community enhancement she'd envisioned, just not in the way she'd planned, and certainly not with her company receiving the contracts. Sometimes the right idea pursued the wrong way fails, while the right idea pursued with integrity and transparency succeeds. As for me, I've learned a valuable lesson about being an engaged community member. I now attend HOA meetings regularly, though I still decline to run for the board, have gotten to know more of my neighbors, and take pride in the small garden space at the corner of my property where the oak tree provides shade for a bench that's become a popular spot for neighbors to chat. The fence that once threatened to cage in my property has been replaced by flower beds that invite people in, a much better boundary in my opinion. And every now and then, when I'm sitting on that bench enjoying the garden and greeting passing neighbors, I raise my coffee mug in a silent toast to Diane Whitfield, wherever she may be. Thank you, Diane, for teaching our community the value of transparency, cooperation, and respecting boundaries, all lessons you clearly needed to learn yourself.